because I'm going to let her tell you about that has evolved into a life experience, just like mine has. And Betty, it's wonderful to have you with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's very heartfelt. And Betty, you know, I'm sure you have told your story as many times or more than I have told mine. But why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about Kazaa and what originally happened to you?
Okay, well, I've had several UFO encounters, beginning in 1944 when I was just a child, and I had this tiny ball of light come into a little hut that my brother Wayne had made, and I was waiting for my girlfriend to come over and play dolls with me, and this ball of light came in, whizzed around my head, and I was eating crackers, and I thought it was a bee. I dropped the crackers, but the ball of light landed right in between my eyes, and when it did, I went down and out, and I could hear voices saying that I was a wee little one and I was coming along just fine, and they said a few other things, and at that, it was gone. The next thing I remember is being awake and feeling on my forehead and thinking a bee had bit me, and my girlfriend Dee Dee came in, and she asked me why I was crying, and I told her I felt as if I got bit by a bee. She examined me and said there was no bump or any spot on my eye, so we continued playing dolls, and I forgot all about it. Then in 1950, I was taken by a gray being into a craft of light to see the one. I had been going up into the woods. I was sort of a tomboy, and it was early morning, and I looked off to the right-hand side, and I saw the moon getting larger and larger and brighter coming toward me, and it was at that time I was picked up and brought aboard the craft. I was put on different tables and a wheel, and they put some kind of apparatus in my mouth and under my tongue and around my ears as I was on this wheel that turned round and round. And we went into some water in this craft, and there was like a huge window overhead, and we moved along in the water. It seemed like white all around, and then into a cave. We came out of the water and into a cave. And as we moved down this cave, I could see it was like looked like ice or white glass or some kind of material on the walls. And as we moved along, I looked off to the left-hand side, and I could see that there were these cubicles with people in them, and they were in a state of suspended animation, or as if they were just statues within these glass objects. And there were quite a few of them, and they were dressed differently and different ages of people that were present in these cubes. As we moved along, I looked off to the right-hand side, and I could see like white snow, like a valley, and then some hills and a mountain, but no sky. It was like a cavity in the wall that I could see out and see this area. Then I kept on going and in the craft, and we came into a very dark, misty area, and I was taken out of the craft at that time. During this particular time that I was abducted in 1950, I was brought to see the one into the world of light. And this was under hypnosis that this information came out. And the hypnotist tried to get the information out of who the one was and what the world of light was all about, but it was impossible. It was a wonderful experience that I had experienced, and I could not explain it in words. It just was something that you could not speak of. And I was taken out of that area afterwards, and I was brought into another craft, and it was there that they did an examination on me, and they thrust a needle into my right eye socket and into my head, and I could see all lights going off and on, like in bright colors. And after this particular experience, I was brought back home. Then in 1967, I had another major encounter. and gray beings had entered my home and placed me, my family, I should say, in a suspended state of animation. And they left me with a thin blue book that I was allowed to keep, and they said it was an initiation of some type. And I was brought out of my home and into a craft and given examinations. First of all, they were going to only examine me for light, but then they decided, no, they have to examine me physically. And what they did was they had a needle and they went into my left nostril with it. And this was very painful, and the being saw that I was fearing from it, and so he laid his hand upon my forehead and took away a great deal of the pain. But when they did put the needle in and they withdrew it, I saw a BB-like device on the very end of the needle, and evidently that was an implant that they had put inside my head in 1950. Then I was transported into another area in a liquid-filled chair to another realm, and it was I was taken out of there and into a dark, long tunnel into a reddish area atmosphere where there were beings, small red creatures with stalk eyes, very unusual things. I was then taken into a green atmosphere, and we're moving along this track that was up in the air in this green atmosphere, and I could see an ocean underneath. Off to the side, I saw something like a craft. It looked like a huge fish-type craft moving along. And as we moved along, a being was in front of me, a being in back of me, and I could see off to the left-hand side, a huge city. It seemed like it was just on the edge of this ocean, and there were these tracks running all through the city. We moved along a little further, and it was, I saw this pyramid, three-sided pyramid with like an Egyptian head with a scarf on it on the very top of the pyramid. We continued to move along, and I saw this bright, bright light ahead, and I saw these crystals just hanging in the air, and they were just beautiful, magnificent. The light in back of it was shining, and it was casting like rainbows around, and I become very fearful because this whole thing was so strange to me, and I wanted to go back at that point, but we just continued on. My escorts, one in front of me, one in back of me, kept moving along, and I in the middle, and I was stuck to this small type track that moved across the water. And I came to an area where there was this huge bird. The beings got off the track, and I was moved up toward the bird, and there was light in back of it, and the bird was huge. Its wings were down, and I could see the fluffing of the feathers on the wings, and all of a sudden it became very, very hot, and I saw sparks of light all over the place, and evidently I had passed out at that point because of the heat. And when I awoke, I saw a large hill of ashes, and out of them emerged a worm. Now, the author, Raymond E. Fowler, of the book The Andreasson Affair.
Oh, yeah, I know it well.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was the one that felt it was like a phoenix experience that I had gone through. If it was staged, I don't know. It seemed so real. It seemed more real than anything I can think of or what is before me. And at that point, after that happened with the worm emerging, I saw this bright, bright light, and a voice, like many voices with it, came out of it and called my name and said, "Betty, you have seen and you have heard. Do you understand?" And I said, "No, I don't understand. I don't even know why I'm here." And then I asked if it was the Lord, and that I would know if it was the Lord. And I had like a spiritual experience at that point. It was just so wonderful. Words cannot explain how wonderful the experience was. After that, I was told I would have to return, and during the return trip, the leader, whose name was Quasgar, said he was locking secrets in my mind that would be released when the time was right, and that there had been other people that had come on a trip like this, but had not all of them had gone the full distance. In other words, they had not gotten it as far as I was escorted back home by the two Grays, and my mother and father were there, and my 7 children, but they had been placed in a state of suspended animation, and each one of them were put to bed. And there was a thin blue book left with me that I was allowed to keep for 10 days. My daughter, Becky, who was only 11 years old at the time, she came to me and said, "Mommy, I keep on having this dream where these little gray people are in our house." And she's seeing the book, and an exchange. I passed the Bible to them when they passed me the thin blue book. They had allowed her to come out of that state of suspended animation to show me that my family would be all right. My family was fine. After Becky came to me and told me about the dream she kept on having for 3 days, I felt, I have to speak with her. I have to show her the book, even though I was told not to show anybody the thin blue book. And when I did, I took it out of the closet where I had it, and I showed her, and she was just in awe of it. I opened the pages, and the first 3 pages were a bright light, and then there were all sorts of numbers and poems and words in it. Well, when she touched it, her hand became like sparkles of light. And ever since then, Becky has been trained to write their unusual language, but in symbol form.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be back in just a moment with this amazing story.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland online and on the IBC Radio Network.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We are having an enthralling experience today, listening to Betty Luca describing her encounters, and which were frankly, in a way, I think, on a higher level than mine. Mine were hard and harsh, and they led me in a profoundly spiritual direction, as everyone knows, but I've always been kind of on the fence about, was it dark or light or good or evil? What is your feeling about the whole experience on that, in that way? Is it a good experience or something evil, and who do you think they are?
Well, I think that it was, for me, it was a good experience. I'm sorry to hear that you had that problem of not realizing which way it was. For me, I just place my faith in Jesus Christ and believe He is with me, and He is the one that makes everything happen. God has everything in His hands, and if you trust in God, I feel that that alone is going to get you through anything that we have to go through. If it's for just a learning experience or whatever, you will get through it, because if God be for you, who can be against you?
Yes. Well, my experience was very surprising, and I had apparently a lot of experiences as a child, and I don't think that who came to me when I was in my 40s expected me to be so surprised. I think that they expected me to remember them, and I didn't. And it created a difficult experience for them and for me, because I was really reduced to a screaming frenzy, because, as far as I could see, I woke up, instead of being in bed, I was in a room full of gigantic insects, And that was a little bit upsetting. I mean, you can imagine. Now, let me ask you this. You have one of the most moving and deepest faiths, and it's a lot like my own faith. That is, you would call yourself, I guess, a Bible Christian or a fundamentalist Christian, but not, there's a lot of sort of politics and almost hatred in that whole area right now.
Unfortunately, that's true. That's true.
But it's not what you are at all. It's not your being at all. Tell us a little bit about what your faith means to you.
It means everything to me, Whitley. I feel when I accepted Christ as my personal Savior when I was about 16 or 17 years old, my whole life changed. And as I read His Word, the Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament, I could feel how alive it was. And I just kept feeding myself on the Word. And the words tell you that you become dead to the world and alive in Christ. And what has happened, what you see is not Betty Whitley. What you see and what you hear, if you feel that love, if you feel that truth, it is because it is the Christ that is shining through. Because, as I said, I am dead to the world and alive in Christ. I sleep in the bosom of God and allow Christ to come through. Let Him have His will done.
That's beautiful and very moving, and it reminds me so much of one of my favorite authors, Meister Eckhart, who wrote in the 13th century and who said, we must become as a clear glass through which God can shine.
Yes.
And this idea, of course, is echoed down the ages. And do you attribute this to the excellence of your experience? Because you had a journey, and the reason it has such an otherworldly quality to it is I think it was a journey into another dimension that you were able to sustain in memory afterwards. And I have a feeling that has to do with your faith. And I want to ask you a very specific question now. The experience of the bird, which is one of the most awesome things I have ever read. I will never forget in reading it in the Andreasson affair, not long after I had begun doing research on this, perhaps 6 months to a year after I'd had my own experience. I thought, I'm jealous. This is so cool and so extraordinary. What does it mean to you? A lot has been written about it, of course, mythologically, but what does it mean to you?
I think it's life, death, and transformation. That's what it comes down to.
And it was an experience of seeing the process of, or the energy, as it were, of the transformation of life.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not, I guess you can't really interpret it fully. Of course, who could? I mean, it's really there to be described to others. Why do you think you had all of these experiences, Betty?
I think it's to glorify God. Now, you might wonder, well, how is this glorifying God? God is all in all evenly present. I mean, we don't give Him enough glory for all that He has done for us. The simple things, I mean, the water we drink, the food we have, the homes that we have, just our life in particular, our partners, our children and grandchildren. It's all a part of God, and I just think that we should be more appreciative of all that we have. The earth itself, the trees, everything is just so beautiful.
I've always thought, or at least since my encounter experience and I began to remember what happened to me as a child, that one of our problems is that we know so little of the universe, and therefore God in our imagination is so little. And and that we need to open our imaginations really to God. And I think that's, in a sense, what you did. But there has been criticism of your experiences by people, by Christians, who say that you were in contact with demons. How do you react to this?
Well, I know this is a very difficult position, and it just overwhelms me to see a person that claims to be a Christian that would have that feeling, because everything that happens is under God's care. I mean, nothing can exist, nothing can be without the Spirit of God. And it's all what we bring to it, I think. If we have fear, if we think the world is so evil and all these things, we're going to bring that with us during our experiences. We become fearful, and therefore we classify it as being demonistic.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I always ask, when I get letters from people saying that I should be careful because I'm in league with demons, I always say, doesn't it ever occur to you that I might be in league with angels? You don't know.
That's right. Exactly. That's perfectly put.
Yes, and always the challenge that comes to us, because God has given us the gift of the mind, is that we must seek understanding when we come face to face with these things, and in our own minds and hearts. It's given to us in that sense. And that leads me to another question, which is, what do you think they were and are?
I think they're angels. However, the description of them, when I saw them, I thought, who are these? But then the scripture comes into my mind and said, entertain strangers, for it may be angels unaware. We, in our imagination, have an idea or a thought of what angels are supposed to look like. There are levels of angels in God's kingdom, and there are some winged angels, which are the seraphim, which are some of the higher parts of God's kingdom. But these that I experienced, even though they do not look like angels, I believe they are messengers, and that to me is an angel. And the elders that I saw, I feel that they too are higher up in the kingdom of God.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Betty Andreasson Luca. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland online and on the IBC Radio Network.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're having a conversation with Betty Andreasson Luca. And Betty, I would like to ask you now, when did you first remember any of this?
Well, I recall the beings, the lights going out and the beings coming into the house. I had some memory of that. And I was shocked when I underwent regressive hypnosis and the entire account came out. I was a little bit afraid at first that something was wrong with me, that I was either lying and not knowing it, or making these things up, or else I was sick in some way. And so I approached the investigators that were investigating my case and said, is there any way that we can find out that everything is truth? And they were kind of pleased over this, because they, of course, wanted to do lie detector tests and everything and have a psychiatrist check me out. And they were, meanwhile, checking all the neighborhood to see what type of a person I was. But that is more or less what had occurred.
So what happened was that you had these memories, and did you take them to Ray Fowler? How did you happen to get into?
No, I didn't. What had happened was I had lights in the sky to please get in touch with him. And so I thought, well, I'm going to get in touch with him about UFOs, he said. I'm going to get in touch with him, and I sent the conscious memory I had of what happened, and he in turn filed it away in his files for over 2 years. And when I had sent it, I felt a weight lift off of me, because I felt, well, here's a learned man, will probably figure out what happened. But those 2 years went by, and there was a Massachusetts group that wanted to study anyone that had a humanoid contact, and they approached Dr. Hynek at the Center for UFO Studies and asked if he had anything in their area, and he in turn sent my letter to them, and that's how it all began. The investigators gathered together, and Ray Fowler was one of the top ones, and they began to interrogate me of what had happened.
And what did you say in the letter to Alan Hynek exactly?
Well, I drew a picture of the being that I saw come into the house.
Right.
And I told him, that the lights had gone out, and this creature came into the house, and we were in the kitchen, and I believe I told him how they wanted knowledge tried by fire, but I thought it was food tried by fire. So I began to take some meat out of the refrigerator and cook them some meat, and as I did,
cook up a meal for them.
The smoke rose from the meat, and they stepped back in alarm, and they told me, no, not that. More or less, it was they wanted knowledge tried by fire, and the only thing I could think of was the Bible. But I hadn't gotten to that point. At that point, I just recalled the being there, and that was the information I had sent.
So, and from that, now, what do you understand now that knowledge tried by fire means?
I think it's knowledge that has been around for a long time and is truth.
So they were saying we want truth, essentially.
Right. And yet, they must have had it. However, there is scripture where it says that angels even would like to look into things of God. So they evidently don't have all the information either.
No, I think that that one of the great places in the universe to look for the new is in the human mind, and it's because of the fact that we are embedded in time, and we don't really know what will happen to us in the future, and we don't understand the past very well, and the result is that we are constantly being surprised by new things, and that is where you find new ideas and new thoughts, and it might be we're very interesting to them for that reason.
I think too, the Word of God lets us know. Now, a lot of people don't believe in sin or hell or any of those things, but in Genesis it tells about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and when God had created everything, and He told man not to touch that tree, and then when Eve did eat of that tree, what she really did was she took the food of God that He did not want her to have, because the tree of knowledge of good and evil is really the tree of judgment, the law, and death. And sin came in, just as God said it would, that if you eat of this tree you shall die, and the wages of sin is death.
And so here we are.
Right.
A few years later.
But I feel that Christ lifts that. As you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, I feel that the sacrifice that He went through, the offering of His blood, His body, that if you believe in that and accept that sacrifice, that you enter the kingdom.
I would like to turn now with just after I must respond to what you said, and that I thank you for saying it. It's a very beautiful and moving statement. However, we've got to keep going with our questions, because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. But I want to respect it, and it doesn't really lead to another question in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to sort of change to a different subject right now, which is the subject of the star language. And this is the language that you spoke under hypnosis that I recognized actually when I saw it written in Ray's book and began to pronounce it myself as probably Gaelic. Mm-hmm. And I found a chap who could translate this, and he translated it. Mm-hmm. And I'll just, for the listeners, I will read the translation that we're going to be talking about.
Okay.
Oops. Oh, I proceeded to, what have I done? I am no technology genius, and what I've done here is just as I was getting ready to read it, I pushed the wrong button and caused it to disappear from my web browser.
Oh.
Somehow.
Well, there were multiple languages within there. In the very beginning, separate linguists looked at the writings and said there were 7 to 9 languages within the writings there. And Paul Potter, when he translated the material, he translated it through Latin, Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, and Sanskrit, and Italian and Celtic.
Okay, well let's talk about some of these translations then. And why don't you tell us, do you have them in hand at all? Or
yes, I do. I have some right here that Paul has done. And the words are very unusual. I'll try and pronounce them again. Escalate, Condosa, Megastrike, Seventia, Sola, and Cratra, Gossamer, and Ductra. And his translation was that the sun's gossamer building, escalating, leading to a megastrike to sift over 7, leading up to a megastrike to sift over and make desolate 7. And then there's this one here that is Noconda, Emisato, Domio, Calatra, Ignitro, Edito, Cosinita, Egrando, Adonai, Christos, Calostra, Andra, Agracia, Callisto, Bone, Sela. Now his translation was, the illuminous Christ, Lord of righteous, gracious heaven, proclaims, calls out, seal the increasing flow of harmful burning beams, rapidly discharging painful suffering. The next one is.
Well, wait. Let's go back to the first one, because before we read them all off, because I want to talk about it, and the reason is that it is particularly interesting now because we are in a time when the sun has been surprisingly restless.
Right.
And we had the solar max, and then after the solar max, we've had a series of periods where there have been very intense and unexpectedly intense solar activity. Mm-hmm. The most recent one being just a few months ago, and we're talking now in April of 2005. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I say that because our subscribers can listen to these shows are archived, and somebody might be listening to this a year from now, and so for our subscribers it goes back a while. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the number 7 refers in some mystical traditions to the earth, and of course it is the number of completion. And if indeed we are coming up toward a moment of completion, as certain things like the Mayan calendar suggest in 2012, right, maybe that's actually a prophecy about what's going to happen. How do you react to that?
Well, the writings is there is a man who is called Ben Hudgens, And he is the source that has been providing a lot of the information, as well as Paul Potter. And the information coming out shows that, there's a foaming sea of plasma gases moving through the vast realm of space toward us. He also, Ben has also been able to show the revelations he has received on the star maps. And this is out quite a ways. We're trying to figure out how it is connected to what is going on right now with the gases, the misty clouds that are coming toward us and everything. We don't know what it is. That's why we need help in trying to decipher all of this material,
Exactly. And this idea of this cloud of gases coming towards us is a very interesting one in light of the fact that a extinction cycle that runs 62 million years has been discovered, and scientifically, and we began an extinction event on the Earth 3 million years ago, 62 million years after the last one, which is the one that brought the dinosaurs down. And since then, there's something happened then that caused Central America to rise up out of the sea, and since then we've had an alternating period of good weather and these ice ages, or something like that has happened. It's become very unstable, and the number of species has been dropping. Could we be talking, I wonder, about a climax? In other words, if there is a gas cloud that we go through every 60-something million years, it may be that we've actually been going through it for a while, and that we're going to reach the denser part of it shortly, or something. What is now, I'm not going to ask you to answer these questions in a scientific way, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Betty what her feelings are about the future and what it may mean. This is Whitley Strieber, it's Dreamland. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland online and on the IBC Radio Network.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back. We're talking with Betty Andreasson Luca, one of the great figures in the world of close encounter, perhaps the best articulated close encounter experience anyone has ever had, and I include myself in that anyone. I've had some extraordinary experiences, but I have never reached the level of articulation about them that Betty has. I know there's a lot more in me that I could say and haven't been able to. Now, Betty has. Betty, based on that, and based on your I think what I would describe as a very high sense of being, where do you think we're going in terms of our future?
I hate to say, really.
No. We're here to listen.
I know. The information that was given to me, I didn't understand very well, but Ben Hudgens and Paul Potter have really worked very, very hard on it and have come up with some spectacular information. But it does not look good because of it seems as if things are becoming unbalanced, And, it's not only the Earth and the solar system that seems to be having a problem of balancing again. It's man himself. We need to get to a balance, and I think that's God calling us to start to look to Him for balance, because rather than our own will, rather than us wanting to do what we want to do, let's try to find out what God would have us to do.
How will we go about that, Betty?
Well, I can only say because of my own faith. I can't tell, about someone that might believe, that might be Jewish and just have the Old Testament to go by. I could, or someone that is let's say, I can't think of the names now, but because I'm not into those
Betty?
Different religions.
Betty,
yes.
Lift the bushel and let's hear the light. Go ahead and tell us what you think.
Well, I think that we have to come to Jesus Christ in order to save ourselves first and our planet. Without Him, who has died for us to take away death, He took our place, and He died on the cross for us, where we should have been. When you see Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, that should have been us because of us falling away from God. We're not doing His will, but our will. And that's what I feel. We all need to get back to the balance, and Christ is the answer for that balance.
Okay, that is where sort of where you are, and it's your message right now. However, it feels to me as if and I remember the experience you had of being kind of on that track that took you to the epical experience of the bird of fire, and there was a feeling in your you couldn't get off that track, and I
couldn't.
I think that the reason I think that experience is so important, and it struck me immediately when I was first reading Ray's book, is that we are on that track. It was a prophecy, a prefigurement of where we are going now, and we're well on it. And the question is, in other words, there are so many people on this planet. It is now with China and Asia burgeoning in consumption unbelievably. The planet is being stressed to the point where perhaps we're going to go through whatever we're destined to go through. In other words, do you think we could save ourselves from a great change like that, or do we need to go through a sort of Armageddon in order to get to a more peaceable kingdom? And if so, those of us on this side of the catastrophe, how should we act?
Yes, I think we do have to go through an Armageddon because we have not accepted the Word. The Word is the truth, and God has tried to speak to us since the very beginning, and we've rejected Him, or we've put our own interpretation on His work or His words. It's hard to say, but I feel as if we need to get back to our Lord and Savior.
Well, it's probably actually it would be a profound change, but of course, no matter what you and I and listeners do or don't do, billions of people will not. That is the case. They will not.
And that's right, and that's why this is happening, I feel. That is the reason why this is happening. We are not all as one. The Lord would have us as one.
Given that, those who are surrendered now, how will they be during the time that this unfolds?
Well, if they are not taken up right away, they're going to also go through tribulations and problems and troubles that have come upon the earth. And when it comes right down, if people are still there during the latter part of all of this happening, when the earth or the Armageddon takes place, that is when they will go to heaven at that point.
What do you say? I encounter people all the time who say, well, I don't care what happens because I'm saved and I'll be raptured.
Well, that's because they can't believe that there is a hell and what will happen to them afterwards if they are not saved. And for them not to believe there is a hell means they don't believe what Jesus has said in the Word of God.
Oh, so they're not really saved then?
Not if they cannot believe that they're, the adversary to our soul loves it if we don't believe that there is a hell, because that allows an individual to do just as they please rather than stay in the will of God.
Well, it's certainly something that I certainly wouldn't want to hedge my bets on that one. I'm going to go ahead and believe in it.
That's good.
Now, Betty, let me slightly change directions. We're coming up on the end of our time together. Was this, do you think, this connection with these beings in your family prior to your life, or are you the first in your family this happened to?
No, I think that my mother and father had experiences with some of these things, and I think it goes back to my grandparents as well.
And why do you think
the reason I think also is because I believe that we also, in my family, have a Hebrew background. And why I say that is because, and not only Hebrew, but Irish and English background. Why I say this is because you can tell by the names that are in your family. My grandparents' names were Esther and Elias, and there's so many names in my whole family that have Hebrew names, have Irish names, have English names to them, even though they're Finnish and they're Swedish and some French and Spanish. But the names that we select for our children or our grandchildren, whatever, and our grandparents' names all tell you a story of what your lineage has been all the way up.
That's fascinating. And so here you are. Where are you going, Betty?
Well, I think I'm going to heaven eventually.
Well, one would hope. What do you think that do you have any sense of the beings being around you now?
Yes, we're still having experiences happen. The last experience I've had was February 26th of this year, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden, Bob and I were in bed, and he was sleeping, and I awoke. I heard a sound of a fan, but it was a very strong sound of a fan overhead. And I happened to turn toward my husband. And when I looked over toward the end of the bed, there was this tall woman just standing there looking at me. And she looked sort of Victorian. Her hair was pulled back real tight. And then, boom, it was gone. And I woke up Bob at that time and told him exactly what I had seen, so that if I had failed to remember it in the morning, that he would remember it. Well, after I laid back down to sleep, and we both tried to sleep, and we couldn't, and then all of a sudden I heard again a sound of a fan overhead, like a loud sound, like bicycle wheels with cards. You know how kids put cards in there and make that sound go around the wheel. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And that was very loud. It went on for a little while and stopped, and then it went on slightly and stopped, and that was it. That was just a recent experience I've had.
Betty Andreasson Luca, seeing and hearing those from another level of reality. And do you know something, that those who are truly surrendered in the way that Betty describes, for them all voices are the voices of angels. Don't forget it. This is Whitley Strieber, this is Dreamland, and next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online. and on the IBC Radio Network.
You're about to experience something that you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe, reporting on the absolute leading edge of science discovery and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the facts and the secrets that others dare not. This week, she's reporting on a pretty astonishing discovery under the Serpent Mound. You remember what that Serpent Mound is out in the Midwest, put there many hundreds or even thousands of years ago by a lost tribe of Indians. Now we have found out something stunning about it. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. And that Serpent Mound region is connected to crop formations in the United States. And this week, the first crop formation in England of 2005 has been reported in Ripley, east of Bournemouth, Dorset. It's a pictogram in beautiful yellow flowering oilseed rape and was discovered Sunday, April 17th by Michael Thorpe, only 11 days after the first grass circles were found in Heuven, Holland, that I talked about on Dreamland. Thorpe said that this 150-foot-long pattern was laid down in a, quote, circular design that seems to have two arms which spiral out from the center in a sort of stepped fashion, unquote. For photographs of this crop pattern and to keep up with crop formations in England all year long, please bookmark www.cropcircleconnector.com and visit my website, www.earthfiles.com, for in-depth reports about crop formations around the world. And one of the most outstanding crop formations of all time occurred in the United States in 2003. It was around 11 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, August 24th, 2003, at the Brush Creek Bridge in Peebles, Ohio, that a family saw what they called an oddity in a nearby soybean field that was not natural. Well, it turned out to be an extraordinary pattern in soybeans only a half mile from the tail of the famous Serpent Mound, which was mysteriously built 1,000 years ago to be seen from the sky, but no one knows why. In North America, the Ohio Serpent Mound is comparable to Britain's Stonehenge and Peru's Machu Picchu as one of Earth's large and most mysterious man-made structures. Whoever built the Serpent Mound might have recognized the land as the most interesting geological structure in Ohio, a crater about 6 miles in diameter, produced nearly 260 million years ago by a strong impact. The land is very unusual, with vertical upthrust and downthrust, which is in contrast to the rest of flat Ohio. At earthfiles.com, at the top of the headlines page, there is a hot link to this report about the impact at the Serpent Mound, which includes a satellite image taken through a filter, which enhances the circular crater structure. The Serpent Mound is at the southwestern edge of the crater, and one theory has been that the unusual geological structure might be the remains of an old volcano. But now, geologists and geophysicists at Ohio's Wright State University, the Ohio Geological Survey, and the University of Vienna in Austria have detected the presence of cracked quartz crystal and iridium beneath the crater. Iridium is a silver-gray metal not common on Earth and is largely associated with comets and meteorites. The new theory is that 256 million years ago, an object from outer space hit the ground so hard that it created this 6-mile diameter crater that fractured quartz crystal as far down as 10,000 feet, or nearly 2 miles, and left a core of the outer space iridium. Here now, from Wright State University, the Department of Geological Sciences in Dayton, Ohio, is Associate Professor of Geophysics Doyle Watts, who led the team in this recent investigation.
The odd thing about the geology of the area is that there's an outer ring of rocks about 6 miles in diameter that have dropped down about 1,000 feet. That is, they're not in the right place from the geological point of view. And the other thing is that in the center of the structure, the rocks have come up 1,000 feet, and they're intensely deformed. They look like they've been pulled through a napkin ring. They're just, it's very much unlike any of the rocks that one finds in Ohio, which are normally flat-lying and have not been deformed. And this is the geological structure. It's about 6 miles in diameter, and it's located on geological maps. And the Native Americans built the monument on the flank of the geological structure, on the southwestern flank. So it's not located, the monument's not located in the middle of the structure. It's located on the flank of the structure. So we knew from previous investigations that there was something very odd about the geology of this part of Ohio. And the reason we worked on it was to sort out between the two hypotheses that explained it. In the 1920s, the people that mapped the geological structure thought that it was an old volcano, but more recently, in the 1960s, a group of workers thought that it was the scar of an impact. And we decided to investigate the geological structure in more detail because we had data available. There was seismic data. This is data that the oil company uses to image the subsurface. And there were rock cores that had been collected in the 1970s that were drilled down to a depth of about 1,700 feet by an exploration mining company. We had that data available, and we decided the time was right to look at it. So we didn't discover the feature. It's been known since, a long time ago. And I feel that the Native Americans probably noticed something was strange about the area because that's where they chose to build a very significant monument.
Mm-hmm. And what precisely did you find?
In the core, we found rocks that have been shattered and have been pushed downwards down to the bottom of the core. That's 1,700 feet below the surface where the core was collected. And there were actually two cores, one from the center of the feature and one from the periphery of the feature. We found features called shatter cones. These are features that show very fine fracture lines on the surface of the rock when you break it. And they are indicative of a passage of a shock wave through the rock. My colleagues found quartz that had been deformed. What happens when you get a shock and you squeeze a crystal of quartz at very high pressures? There's partial melting along certain crystallographic planes due to the intense pressure. And my colleagues found quartz that had been subjected to that effect.
But the bottom line is that the pressure of impact from something large from outer space coming and hitting in Ohio 250, 60 million years ago would have this kind of cracking of quartz crystal impact, similar to what we would find in atomic bomb tests?
Yes. You would need the amount of energy released that we would get, that one would get in an atomic bomb to produce such a texture in these particular crystals. And let me say that the energy that produced the Serpent Mound structure is far greater than any nuclear device that's been activated by humans, because no device has created a crater 6 miles across and fractured the rock so deeply.
Down to about 1,700 feet at the maximum?
No, that was the maximum depth of the core. I would say that at the minimum. We don't know what's beneath it because the core only ended at 1,700 feet.
Wow, so it could be 6 miles in diameter and who knows how deep?
Well, we've actually got a good idea how deep because that's where I contributed most to the effort. The oil industry had gathered some seismic data. This is a way of imaging what's beneath the Earth using sound waves. The device that's used is a vibro-sized truck. It's a large truck that essentially has a 2-ton speaker mounted on it. And the reaction mass will move up and down between 6 to 100 times a second, producing sound waves of those frequencies. And I process the data that have been gathered, and I can say that looking at those images, that the effect of the structure goes down about 2 miles. I would say about 10,000 feet, because we can see that the rocks are deformed in the seismic image down to that depth.
How big do you think the object was that caused all of this destruction?
It depends on the nature of the object. If it was dense and heavy, like an iron meteorite, it wouldn't have been all that big, maybe the size of 2 or 3 football stadiums, if you can imagine something that big. If it were a lighter object, say a fragment of a comet, it would needed to have been bigger than that. But I think we're talking of something that's maybe a few hundred meters across, as opposed to a few thousand meters.
Well, if it had been an iron core meteorite, wouldn't you be able to find that the residue of that iron meteorite?
I don't think so. If it's so old, 256 million years or older, meteorites like that are not stable at the surface of the Earth. They weather quite readily. They'll rust effectively. And if there's 250 million years gone by, then it's unlikely that that would have been preserved. What is preserved, and what my colleagues have found, it was Dick Carlton of the Ohio Geological Survey and Mark Baranowski worked with Christian Kerbel at the University of Vienna. They sent them some samples, and Professor Kerbel found higher concentrations of the element iridium. Mm-hmm. Iridium's not all that common on the Earth, and they found within the core, from samples taken within the core, higher concentrations of iridium. And that's probably all that's left of the impacting body. And by the way, this is the sort of thing that gives evidence that supports the impact theory, because volcanic activity just would not produce the levels of iridium that my colleagues discovered.
And I understand it's 10 times beyond what is usually present in the Earth's crust, the amount of iridium at the Serpent Mound?
It's the sample they looked at, which was gathered from the core, and I'm not sure how deep it was, but it was around 1,000 feet deep. Certainly had 10 times the normal concentration. I don't know that anybody's found an iridium anomaly near the surface. Mm-hmm.
But we think that iridium is being associated largely with asteroids and comets, don't we?
Yes. That is the current thinking, the current wisdom, that you have to have an extraterrestrial source for such concentrations of iridium.
Now, I think it was from the Plain Dealer newspaper that it said, quote, fine grains of sand taken from 1,439 feet down appear deformed when viewed under a microscope. There even seem to be particles of soot left from scorched limestone, although researchers say additional work is needed before the strange black material is positively identified, unquote. Have you been able to find out what this black material in the scorched limestone is?
I'm not aware of any further progress on that. It was my colleagues at the Ohio Geological Survey that were examining the thin sections and the microscope slides that they've produced. And I don't know that they've made any further progress on that.
Any speculation?
No. That's their line of work, not mine.
Well, could it be carbon from burn?
It could be carbonaceous material. I don't think it would have been material from a fire that had been created by the impact, because the temperatures at that depth were not very high, at least not for very long, and I don't know what would have burned. It might have been, I think that there are, if I speculate, if you look at some of the rocks exposed at the surface as well as in the core, there's evidence that hydrocarbon had once passed through the rock. And it's not active hydrocarbon, it's the very thick residue that's left behind. And so I wouldn't recommend drilling any oil wells, at least at those depths. But it could be bitumen that was left behind by the passage of hydrocarbon through the porous rocks. And that could have happened any time after the creation of the feature.
Any link between the presence of a higher amount of iridium and perhaps magnetic field anomalies over that area?
I don't think so. We've measured the magnetic field over there. There is a magnetic anomaly, but one can use geophysical analysis to determine the depth of the production of the anomaly. And the anomaly that is there is produced by rocks that are over 10,000 feet deep. That's well below the maximum depth of that core.
And the anomaly, the magnetic anomaly, how does that register at the Earth's surface? Could it explain why the Hopewell Indians, as they were called, might have built the Serpent Mound there so long ago because of the magnetic field anomaly?
I don't know they would have had any means to detect it because you can't really see it if you even if you have a magnetic compass, and I don't know that they had magnetic compasses. To actually see the anomaly, you have to make measurements over quite a large area. That's probably pretty much over 30 to 40 square miles, using a device called a proton precession magnetometer that measures the intensity of the field with considerable precision. And the amplitude of the anomaly is no more than 1% of the total field there. So whatever they noticed and whatever reason they chose that site to build the monument, I don't think it was the magnetics. It may well have been the strange disposition of the rocks themselves. But what makes it so intriguing is that this is the very place, at least on the southeastern side, that the Native Americans chose to build the monument, and the area must have been very sacred to them. And it just begs the question, why would they choose this 6-mile across circle area to build the most spectacular effigy mound seen from the sky?
I asked Professor Watts if there is any evidence of an extinction event that would match the Serpent Mound impact 263 million years ago. He pointed out that the timing is close to what is called the Permian-Triassic boundary. That was the largest extinction event the world has experienced so far, and it occurred about 255 million years ago. Close to 263, but not exact. During the Permian-Triassic boundary, 90% of all marine species died out, and 70% of vertebrate species on land went extinct. And exactly what happened is unknown. The strongest hypothesis is that a large meteorite or piece of comet fell to the Earth. After that, the next big outer space impact was 65 million years ago, when something huge landed near the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out 70% of all Earth's life then, including the dinosaurs. Compared to those Permian and Yucatan impacts, whatever came down in the Serpent Mound, Ohio region was small in comparison. There would have been local devastation over an area maybe the size of Ohio from the debris falling out of the sky and the impact. But Professor Watts does not think that the Serpent Mound impact could have caused wholesale extinctions around the Earth. But he qualified that conclusion by saying, if there had been lots of meteoritic or comet impacts around the world at the same time from something huge that broke up, that might have had a significant impact on Earth's life, such as the Permian-Triassic boundary catastrophe. But so far, there is no evidence that connects the Permian-Triassic extinctions and the mysterious Serpent Mound crater. And for the modern world, the one thing that does connect the Serpent Mound to around the world are the crop formations. And Whitley, I can't help but wonder in my own mind, if we knew the common denominator to crop formations around the world, why they appear and keep appearing in the same areas, might it relate to something underground that we don't know anything about, like the iridium and the cracked crystal, now that we know is at the Serpent Mound region.
And also, one has to ask the question, Linda, did the creators of the Serpent Mound know?
That's right. Why did they focus on that particular area? And I think that same question at Stonehenge and all of the places around the world that people have hypothesized that the magnetic field lines of the Earth determined the placement of many of these ancient sacred sites, which also seem to echo today the placement of the crop formation.
And did they have then, in the past, sensation or awareness that we have lost? Linda Moulton Howe, thank you for a fabulous report. As always, exceptionally mind-opening this week. Wow, what a story. Thanks very much. Next week on Mysterious Powers, Doug Kenyon, the editor of Atlantis Rising magazine, talks about forbidden history with Ann Strieber. Then on Dreamland, Russell Targ, Mind Reach. Russell is one of the founders of remote viewing. I'm going to let her tell you about that. That has evolved into a life experience, just like mine has. And Betty, it's wonderful to have you with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's very heartfelt. And Betty, you know, I'm sure you have told your story as many times or more than I have told mine. But why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about Kazaa and what originally happened to you?
Okay, well, I've had several UFO encounters beginning in 1944 when I was just a child, and I had this tiny ball of light come into a little hut that my brother Wayne had made. I was waiting for my girlfriend to come over and play dolls with me, and this ball of light came in, whizzed around my head, and I was eating crackers, and I thought it was a bee. I dropped the crackers, but the ball of light landed right in between my eyes, and when it did, I went down and out, and I could hear voices saying that I was a wee little one and I was coming along just fine, and they said a few other things, and at that, it was gone. The next thing I remember is being awake and feeling on my forehead and thinking a bee had bit me, and my girlfriend Dee Dee came in, and she asked me why I was crying, and I told her I felt as if I got bit by a bee. She examined me and said there was no bump or any spot on my eye, so we continued playing dolls, and I forgot all. I looked off to the right-hand side, and I could see like white snow, like a valley, and then some hills and a mountain, but no sky. It was like a cavity in the wall that I could see out and see this area. Then I kept on going and in the craft, and we came into a very dark, misty area, and I was taken out of the craft at that time. During this particular time that I was abducted in 1950, I was brought to see the one into the world of light, and this was under hypnosis that this information came out, and the hypnotist tried to get the information out of who the one was and what the world of light was all about, but it was impossible. It was a wonderful experience that I had experienced, and I could not explain it in words. It just was something that you could not speak of. And I was taken out of that area afterwards, and I was brought into another craft, and it was there that they did an examination on me, and they thrust a needle into my right eye socket and into my head, and I could see all lights going off and on, like in bright colors. And after this particular experience, I was brought back home. Then in 1967, I had another major encounter, and gray beings had entered my home and placed me, my family, I should say, in about it. Then in 1950, I was taken by a gray being into a craft of light to see the one. I had been going up into the woods. I was sort of a tomboy, and it was early morning, and I looked off to the right-hand side, and I saw the moon getting larger and larger and brighter coming toward me, and it was at that time I was picked up and brought aboard the craft. I was put on different tables and a wheel, and they put some kind of apparatus in my mouth and under my tongue and around my ears as I was on this wheel that turned round and round. And we went into some water in this craft, and there was like a huge window overhead, and we moved along in the water. It seemed like white all around, and then into a cave. We came out of the water and into a cave. And as we moved down this cave, I could see it was like looked like ice or white glass or some kind of material on the walls. And as we moved along, I looked off to the left-hand side, and I could see that there were these cubicles with people in them, and they were in a state of suspended animation, or as if they were just statues within these glass objects. And there were quite a few of them, and they were dressed differently, and different ages of people that were present in these cubes. As we moved along ocean underneath, off to the side, I saw something like a craft. It looked like a huge fish-type craft moving along. And as we moved along, a being was in front of me, a being in back of me, and I could see over off to the left-hand side a huge city. It seemed like it was just on the edge of this ocean, and there were these tracks running all through the city. We moved along a little further, and it was I saw this pyramid, three-sided pyramid with like an Egyptian head with a scarf on it on the very top of the pyramid. We continued to move along, and I saw this bright light ahead, and I saw these crystals just hanging in the air, and they were just beautiful, magnificent. The light in back of it was shining, and it was casting like rainbows around, and I become very fearful because this whole thing was so strange to me, and I wanted to go back at that point, but we just continued on. My escorts, one in front of me, one in back of me, kept moving along, and I in the middle, and I was stuck to this small type track that moved across the water. And I came to an area where there was this huge bird. The beings got off the track, and I was moved up toward the bird, and there was light in back of it, and the bird suspended state of animation, and they left me with a thin blue book that I was allowed to keep, and they said it was an initiation of some type. And I was brought out of my home and into a craft and given examinations. First of all, they were going to only examine me for light, but then they decided, no, they have to examine me physically. And what they did was they had a needle, and they went into my left nostril with it. And this was very painful, and the being saw that I was fearing from it, and so he laid his hand upon my forehead and took away a great deal of the pain. But when they did put the needle in and they withdrew it, I saw a BB-like device on the very end of the needle, and evidently that was an implant that they had put inside my head in 1950. Then I was transported into another area in a liquid-filled chair to another realm, and it was I was taken out of there and into a dark, long tunnel into a reddish area atmosphere where there were beings, small red creatures with stalk eyes, very unusual things. I was then taken into a green atmosphere, and we're moving along this track that was up in the air in this green atmosphere, and I could see an